Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we are diving deep into what makes us believe what we believe. We're going to connect the dots between neuroscience, self-help, and theology to really get at that constant tug-of-war between our hearts and our minds. You know the feeling, right? You're just driving, maybe running errands, and suddenly a song from your teenage years comes on the radio. And boom, you're not in your car anymore. You're right back at that high school dance or in your childhood bedroom. That feeling? That incredibly powerful, emotional, full-body memory, that's our starting point. It's the key to understanding how our beliefs get wired in and sometimes how they get hijacked. So what is going on there? So here's the game plan. We'll start with that musical time machine, then we'll look at what's actually happening inside your brain during those emotional peaks. From there, we'll see how those feelings can be deliberately harnessed for massive change, explore the potential dark side, and then wrap it all up with a way to think about this in your own life. Right, so why does that one song have such an iron grip on you? Well, it's not just a fuzzy feeling, it's a very specific feature of your brain's wiring. Researchers actually have a name for this. They call it neural nostalgia. See, your brain isn't just filing songs away alphabetically. It's tagging them with the emotions you felt when you first heard them. It's like this massive emotional filing system. And the music from your youth, a time that for many of us was full of intense feelings and maybe a bit less responsibility, that stuff gets VIP status. And what's really wild is that the exact same part of your brain that locks in the memory of a traumatic event, like a car crash, is the same system that records the absolute euphoria of seeing your favorite band live. When you're in any kind of heightened emotional state, good or bad, your brain's limbic system basically hits a giant red record button on everything. The sights, the sounds, the smells, the feelings. And music? Well, music becomes the perfect key to unlock that super vivid, emotionally charged memory file years later. So this emotional recording system is incredibly powerful, but, and this is a big but, that power comes with a serious trade-off. So what happens to our logical, rational brain when our emotions decide to take the wheel? Well, an fMRI study looked at this very question, and the conclusion couldn't have been clearer. When you are emotionally fired up, doesn't matter if you're ecstatic or you're terrified, your ability to think things through and make logical choices takes a massive nosedive. The data from the brain scans is pretty striking. You can see here that when people were feeling neutral, the cognitive control parts of their brain, the bit that handles logic and stops you from doing impulsive things, were buzzing with activity. But the second they were shown highly emotional images, that activity just plummeted. Basically, when feelings go up, rational thought goes way, way down. Okay, so if we know that high emotion can temporarily mute our critical thinking, that leads to a really interesting question, right? Can this state be created on purpose? And if it can, what for? And the answer is a resounding yes. In fact, this is the entire foundation of many high-intensity personal development events, like the ones run by Tony Robbins. The whole point is to intentionally engineer a peak emotional state, using high energy, loud music, intense emotion to create an opening for profound psychological breakthroughs. And the results they claim are, well, they're pretty staggering. A study out of Stanford University looked at people attending one of these events and found something pretty incredible. 100% of the attendees who were clinically depressed before the event were in remission just 30 days later, all from a 6-day immersive experience. And that's not all. The same study also measured biological markers for things like performance and learning, and they saw increases of up to 300%. It suggests these events can trigger not just mental, but actual physical changes. Now, while these peak states can obviously be a powerful force for good, this same mechanism can show up in other, let's say, more questionable contexts. So take a look at this image. What you're seeing here in a state of intense religious fervor, which is another kind of peak emotional state, is followers doing something that their rational minds would on any other day probably reject. It's the exact same principle at work. A highly emotional state, combined with deep trust in an authority figure, can lead people to suspend their critical judgment. Now, this kind of scene often happens within a framework known as prosperity theology. The core belief here is that things like financial blessings and good health are God's will for you, and you can unlock them through strong faith, positive declarations, and very often, donations to the church. So given the sheer power of emotion to override our better judgment, for better or for worse, it becomes absolutely essential to have some tools to counterbalance it. And this is where deliberate, rational thought comes into play. Researchers have a really useful way of breaking this down into two types of thought. First, there's cultural thinking. This is basically our autopilot. It's when we just absorb beliefs from our family, our friends, our culture, without really questioning them. Then there's critical thinking, and this is an active process. This is when you consciously decide to evaluate claims based on evidence and reason, even if it means you have to question authority or a long-held tradition. And really, the heart of critical thinking can be summed up in this one famous line. When someone makes a claim that promises something extraordinary, whether that's curing depression in 6 days or getting divine blessings for a donation, this principle demands that we look for an equally extraordinary level of proof before we buy in. Okay, so how do we put all of this together? We've got these two incredibly powerful forces inside all of us, the potential for real transformation that comes from these peak emotional experiences, and then the essential protective power of reason. And this really gets us to the core dilemma, doesn't it? On one hand, you can't deny that these peak experiences can create genuine positive breakthroughs for people. But on the other, that same emotional openness can make us vulnerable to manipulation or exploitation. It's important to note, too, that many mainstream Christian theologians are highly critical of prosperity teachings. So the real key seems to be finding a balance, embracing powerful experiences while also taking personal responsibility for our choices. This quote from someone talking about their experience at another well-known seminar just hits the nail on the head. The big insight here is that real transformation isn't just about having an amazing emotional experience or even about learning something new. Real, lasting change happens when you take ownership, when you take personal responsibility for your life, when you stop just reading about the solution and actually start doing the work. And so that leaves us with the final question, the one for you to think about. In a world that is just full of people promising a better, happier, richer life, the challenge for every single one of us is to walk that very fine line. How do we stay open to experiences that might genuinely change us for the better while still holding on to the critical thinking that keeps us grounded and safe? How do you find that balance?